Jason Miller had always believed that success meant wealth, recognition, and being ahead in the race of life. Growing up in Austin, Texas, he was the kind of person who had his days planned down to the last second. By the age of 32, he was working as a software architect for one of the fastest-growing tech startups in the country. He had the Tesla, the high-rise apartment, and the social status that many envied. But in quiet moments, like when the city lights dimmed and silence filled his apartment, Jason would feel a void that not even his six-figure salary could fill. His routine life was disrupted the day his company organized a mandatory leadership retreat. The event was held in a remote part of Colorado, and Jason, reluctant but obedient, packed up and flew out for the weekend. During one of the sessions, the keynote speaker, a retired doctor named Raymond Carter, gave a talk that would change the trajectory of Jason's life. Dr. Carter didn't talk about tech innovations or financial independence. Instead, he spoke passionately about a man named Albert Schweitzer. Jason had never heard the name before, but what he learned that day planted the first seeds of transformation. Albert Schweitzer was a theologian, physician, and humanitarian who gave up a life of privilege in Europe to serve people in Africa, establishing a hospital in Lambaréné, Gabon. Dr. Carter spoke about Schweitzer's philosophy of reverence for life, the idea that all life is sacred and that we have a moral obligation to care for others. Something in Jason shifted. He returned home with a curiosity he couldn't shake. He spent days reading Schweitzer's biography, watching documentaries, and diving into every book Schweitzer wrote. And the more he read, the more he realized how shallow his own pursuits had been. The first lesson Jason learned from Schweitzer was that service to others is the highest form of fulfillment. Up until then, Jason's life had been centered around what he could gain: promotions, luxury, admiration. Schweitzer, on the other hand, had walked away from fame and wealth to live in a remote village, treating the sick and living humbly among them. Inspired, Jason began volunteering on weekends at a local shelter that provided meals to the homeless. First, it was just a few hours on Saturdays. But gradually, it became something he looked forward to more than anything else in his week. One rainy afternoon, Jason was helping serve food at the shelter when he met Henry, a Vietnam veteran who had been homeless for nearly 2 decades. Unlike others, Henry didn't ask for money. He simply asked if Jason could sit with him while he ate. They spoke for an hour about war, regret, lost family, and forgiveness. That conversation shattered something inside Jason, a wall he had built around himself to stay disconnected from the world's pain. He realized that people didn't always need charity. Sometimes they just needed someone to acknowledge them, to listen. It was the first time Jason felt what Schweitzer described as being human in the deepest sense. Another powerful lesson he learned from Schweitzer was the importance of inner growth. Schweitzer was not only a doctor but a philosopher and a musician. He believed in the lifelong pursuit of knowledge and inner development. Jason had always dismissed philosophy as impractical, but now he found himself devouring books on ethics, spirituality, and morality. He even resumed playing the piano, an old hobby he had abandoned in college. Music, he found, had a way of softening his heart, reconnecting him with emotions he had long suppressed. Jason began changing the way he approached his job, too. He stopped seeing his team as a group of tools to meet deadlines and started mentoring younger employees. Instead of pushing for quick results, he focused on creating an environment where people felt valued. His colleagues noticed the change. His manager once pulled him aside and said, "You're different lately. More present." Jason smiled, knowing it wasn't just a phase. It was a change from the inside out. The biggest test of his new values came when his company offered him a position overseas, double the salary, executive-level perks, and a chance to work with a global team. It was everything he had once dreamed of. But it would mean leaving behind his volunteer work, the community he had built, and the person he was becoming. He spent sleepless nights thinking about it. Eventually, he declined the offer. Instead, he chose to take a pay cut and transition into a non-profit tech company that develops software for disaster response organizations. His friends were shocked. "You gave up how much?" one asked, stunned. But Jason no longer measured success in numbers. He now saw success in impact, in moments of meaning. He remembered what Schweitzer once wrote: "The purpose of human life is to serve, and to show compassion and the will to help others." That quote became a compass for him. With his new job came a new mission. Jason traveled to areas hit by hurricanes and earthquakes, helping emergency response teams improve their tech systems. He visited Puerto Rico after a storm and helped create a network that connected people in shelters to their missing family members. In those dusty fields and makeshift tents, Jason felt more alive than he ever had in boardrooms. Years passed. Jason eventually started a small non-profit of his own, TechAid Humanitarian Solutions, which focused on bringing digital support to rural health clinics around the world. He even visited Gabon once, standing in front of the very hospital Albert Schweitzer had built. It was a deeply emotional moment for him, like meeting the spirit of the man who had unknowingly saved him. Through this journey, Jason also reconnected with his own family. His estranged father, a retired pastor from Mississippi, had never understood Jason's early pursuit of wealth. But now, seeing his son dedicate his life to something bigger than himself, they rebuilt their relationship. Jason also began mentoring young adults at local colleges, sharing not just technical knowledge but life wisdom rooted in empathy, humility, and purpose. One day, while giving a guest talk at a university, Jason looked around the room full of eager faces and said, "Albert Schweitzer taught me that the value of life isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we give away. Not just money or things, but time, kindness, knowledge, and love." The students were silent, but Jason could tell from their expressions that something had stirred within them, the same way he had felt stirred years ago in that Colorado retreat. Jason never claimed to be a saint. He still struggled with pride, ambition, and occasional restlessness. But whenever he felt himself drifting back to old patterns, he would reread Schweitzer's words or sit at the piano and play one of Bach's preludes, just like Schweitzer had done. It reminded him of who he wanted to be. Now in his mid-40s, Jason lived a simpler life. He drove a used Ford instead of a Tesla, shared a modest home with his partner Olivia and their rescue dog Max, and spent his evenings cooking, reading, or visiting his neighbors. And though he had fewer material possessions, he felt richer than ever. His life, inspired by a man who had lived over a century ago, had taken on a deeper, fuller meaning. As he sat one evening on the porch watching the sun set over the hills, Olivia asked him, "Do you ever miss your old life?" Jason chuckled softly and said, "Not even for a second. I used to chase success. Now I just follow purpose."